Part 1. The Whisper of Giants. We stand before them, these colossal monuments of stone, testaments to a distant past shrouded in an enigma as dense as the granite they are carved from. Temples, pyramids, megalithic structures scattered across the globe, each a silent sentinel guarding secrets that seem to slip just beyond our grasp. We marvel at their scale, the precision of their construction, the sheer audacity of their existence. How did ancient civilizations, lacking the technology we take for granted, achieve such feats of engineering? The conventional narratives, the explanations rooted in ropes, ramps, and brute force, while impressive, leave a lingering question mark etched in the mind. What if, just what if, there's another explanation, a more resonant truth vibrating beneath the surface, waiting to be heard? What if these ancient temples were built not by muscle power alone, but by the very fabric of sound, by frequencies capable of manipulating matter in ways we are only beginning to comprehend? It's a proposition that initially seems fantastical, relegated to the realm of pseudo-archaeology and fringe theories. But the closer we look, the more cracks appear in the established narratives. The sheer weight of some of these stones, hundreds of tons apiece, defies logical explanation when considering the tools supposedly available. The intricate carvings, often performed with a precision that rivals modern machinery, seem almost impossible to replicate with rudimentary implements. And then there are the legends, whispers passed down through generations, speaking of lost sonic technologies, of chants and rituals capable of moving mountains. Could these be more than mere myths? Could they be echoes of a forgotten science, a glimpse into a past where sound was understood not just as vibration, but as a force capable of shaping the very world around us? Consider the nature of sound itself. It's not an ethereal phenomenon, but a physical wave, a ripple of energy propagating through a medium. We experience this energy every day, from the gentle rustle of leaves to the deafening roar of thunder. At its core, sound is vibration, and vibration is motion, a fundamental principle governing the universe at every level, from the subatomic to the cosmic. If we can harness and direct this vibrational energy, is it so far-fetched to imagine its potential to manipulate matter? Modern science is beginning to explore the fascinating world of cymatics, the study of visible sound and vibration. Through experiments using various mediums like sand, water, and even fire, researchers are demonstrating the intricate patterns that emerge when sound waves interact with matter. These patterns, known as Chladni figures, reveal the inherent order within sound, the geometric structures that arise from seemingly chaotic vibrations. Could ancient civilizations have possessed a deep understanding of these principles, utilizing them to levitate, transport, and shape massive stones into the awe-inspiring structures we see today? The evidence, while circumstantial, is compelling. Across cultures, we find recurring motifs of sound and vibration woven into the fabric of ancient beliefs. In ancient Egypt, the god Thoth was associated with the power of sound, his utterance believed to have created the universe. The Tibetan monks, with their deep chanting and use of singing bowls, demonstrate the potential of sound to alter consciousness and perhaps even physical reality. The ancient Greeks, with their understanding of music and its mathematical underpinnings, may have grasped the inherent power of sonic resonance. The very architecture of these ancient temples seems to suggest a connection to sound. Many feature intricate chambers and resonant spaces that amplify and focus sound waves. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, possesses unique acoustic properties, with certain chambers resonating at specific frequencies thought to have significance in ancient Egyptian cosmology. Could these structures have been designed not just as places of worship, but as giant sonic instruments, capable of harnessing and manipulating the very energies that bind the universe together? The exploration of this possibility requires us to step outside the confines of conventional thinking, to embrace the unknown and consider perspectives that challenge our current understanding. It requires us to listen not just with our ears, but with our minds open to the whispers of the past, the subtle vibrations that may hold the key to unlocking the secrets of these magnificent structures. It's a journey into the realm of speculation, a quest to uncover a hidden history, a story written not in ink, but in the very fabric of sound itself. The journey begins with a question, a whisper of possibility. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? The glyphs. They were the key, Professor Armitage insisted, his voice raspy from lack of sleep and the lingering dust of the temple. He paced a worn path in the sand outside our makeshift camp, the setting sun painting the monolithic structure a bloody orange. The shadows lengthened, stretching like grasping fingers across the desolate landscape. We had spent the entire day meticulously photographing and sketching the intricate carvings that adorned every surface of the temple. Geometric shapes intertwined with depictions of beings that defied classification. Too many limbs, too few eyes, or sometimes none at all. There was a maddening symmetry to it all, a rhythm that pulsed beneath the surface, almost audible. They weren't carved, Armitage muttered, stopping abruptly in front of me. His eyes, magnified by thick lenses, were wild with a disturbing blend of fear and fascination. They were impressed, molded by sound, by vibrations. I shifted uncomfortably, the fine sand grinding beneath my boots. Professor, that's impossible. He gave a dry, humorless laugh. Impossible? My dear Alara, we are standing in the shadow of the impossible. A structure built by a civilization that predates recorded history, composed of a material unknown to science, decorated with glyphs that hum with an energy we cannot comprehend. Tell me, what is impossible? He was right, of course. We had crossed the threshold of the known, ventured into a realm where the laws of physics seemed to bend at will. The unnerving silence of the desert, broken only by the whisper of the wind, was a stark contrast to the cacophony of theories buzzing in my head. That night, under a sky teeming with unfamiliar constellations, I couldn't sleep. The glyphs haunted me, their bizarre patterns imprinted on the back of my eyelids. I kept hearing a faint, low hum, like the distant drone of 1,000 insects. It seemed to emanate from the temple, beckoning, promising answers and threatening madness in the same breath. I slipped out of my tent, drawn by an invisible force. The temple loomed in the moonlight, a colossal silhouette against the star-dusted canvas. The hum was stronger now, a palpable vibration that tickled my skin and resonated deep within my bones. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding against my ribs. As I drew closer, I noticed a faint luminescence emanating from the glyphs, a pulsating, ethereal glow. They seemed to shift and writhe, the intricate patterns dissolving and reforming in a hypnotic dance. I reached out, my fingers trembling, and touched the smooth surface of a particularly complex glyph. The moment my skin made contact, a jolt of energy surged through me, a wave of raw, untamed power. I gasped, pulling my hand back as a searing pain shot up my arm. The hum intensified, morphing into a low, guttural chant that seemed to claw at the edges of sanity. The ground beneath me began to tremble. The glyphs pulsed with an almost blinding light, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the surrounding sand. I stumbled back, my mind reeling from the sensory overload. The chant grew louder, resonating with the vibrations of the earth, echoing the rhythm of my own terrified heartbeat. Suddenly, the ground before the temple cracked open, a gaping maw swallowing the sand and revealing a dark, seemingly bottomless abyss. A wave of fetid air rushed out, carrying with it the stench of decay and something ancient, something wrong. The chanting reached a crescendo, the very air vibrating with an unbearable intensity. From the depths of the chasm, a shape began to rise, slowly, agonizingly. It was vaguely humanoid, but impossibly large, its limbs elongated and distorted, its skin a sickly, translucent gray. Its head was elongated, almost serpentine, with a single, cyclopean eye that burned with an unholy light. Terror gripped me, paralyzing me in place. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. The creature continued its ascent, its single eye fixed on me, radiating an aura of malevolent power. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the ground shaking violently, the very stars seeming to tremble in fear. Then, just as I thought I would lose my mind, a voice cut through the chaos. Alara, get back. It was Armitage, his voice strained with urgency. He was running towards me, his face pale and etched with a horror that mirrored my own. He grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the gaping chasm just as the creature fully emerged, its grotesque form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its single eye burned with a malevolent intensity, promising unimaginable horrors. We stumbled back, fleeing the scene of unfolding nightmare, the chanting echoing in our ears, a prelude to the terror that awaited us. The glyphs, we realized, were not mere decorations. They were a key, a lock, and we had just unwittingly opened the door to something truly terrifying. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 3 of 25. The resonant hum emanating from the monolith had intensified, a low thrum that vibrated through the very marrow of our bones. Professor Armitage, his face pale and etched with a manic gleam, adjusted the dials on his makeshift oscilloscope. The wave patterns displayed on the screen were chaotic, almost sentient, pulsing with an energy that seemed to defy explanation. "It's amplifying," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The storm, it's feeding the energy somehow." The wind howled outside, lashing rain against the canvas of our tent, mimicking the rhythmic pulse of the monolith. We huddled closer, drawn together by a primal fear we couldn't articulate. Even Martinez, the hardened mercenary hired for our protection, seemed unnerved, his hand resting uneasily on the butt of his rifle. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to tremble. Small pebbles danced across the dusty floor of the tent, and the monolith pulsed with an even brighter, sickly green light. A low, guttural groan echoed from within its depths, a sound that seemed to claw at the edges of sanity. "We need to get out of here," Martinez said, his voice strained. "This whole place is going to come down." Armitage, however, was oblivious to the danger. He was entranced, captivated by the pulsating energy of the monolith. He reached out a trembling hand, as if drawn to its power. "No," I shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. "It's not safe." He shrugged me off, his eyes fixed on the monolith. "Don't you see, Elias? This is it. This is the proof. They built these structures with sound, with vibrations. They manipulated the very fabric of reality." The tremors intensified, and cracks began to spiderweb across the surface of the monolith. A high-pitched whine, almost unbearable to the human ear, joined the deep resonant hum, creating a cacophony that threatened to shatter our eardrums. We had to get out. Dragging Armitage away from the monolith was like trying to wrestle a wild animal. He fought and screamed, his eyes wide with a terrifying mix of fear and fascination. Finally, with Martinez's help, we managed to pull him free and stumble out of the collapsing tent. The storm raged around us, blinding us with rain and wind. The ground bucked and heaved, as if some monstrous beast were stirring beneath the surface. The monolith, now bathed in an eerie green glow, seemed to be the epicenter of the chaos. We stumbled blindly through the storm, the deafening roar of the wind and the earth's tremors making communication impossible. We were separated, each of us fighting for survival in the face of an unknown, terrifying force. I found myself clinging to a jagged outcropping of rock, the wind tearing at my clothes. The rain stung my eyes, making it difficult to see. Through the driving rain, I saw a flicker of movement in the distance. It was Martinez, waving frantically towards a sheltered alcove in the rock face. I scrambled towards him, slipping and sliding on the mud-slicked ground. We huddled together in the small alcove, momentarily shielded from the worst of the storm. But even here, the ground continued to tremble, and the air vibrated with the unsettling hum of the monolith. "Where's Armitage?" I shouted over the roar of the wind. Martinez shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know. I lost sight of him in the chaos." The thought of Armitage, alone and exposed to the elements and whatever force was emanating from the monolith, sent a chill down my spine. We had to find him. As the first faint rays of dawn began to penetrate the storm clouds, we ventured back out, the eerie silence now even more unsettling than the previous cacophony. The landscape had been transformed. Deep fissures scarred the earth, and the once proud monolith lay shattered, its pieces scattered across the ravaged ground. And then we saw him. Armitage lay slumped against a fragment of the monolith, his eyes wide open and staring blankly at the sky. He wasn't breathing, his skin was an unnatural shade of gray, and his body was strangely distorted, as if molded by some unseen force. A single, perfectly formed spiral, etched into the rock fragment behind him, pulsed faintly with a sickly green light. The same spiral we'd seen on the monolith, the same spiral that adorned the walls of ancient temples across the globe. We stood there, numb with shock and horror, finally understanding the true purpose of those ancient structures. They weren't built by sound. They were built to contain it. And now, whatever had been imprisoned within the monolith for millennia was free. The silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the whisper of the wind. A whisper that seemed to carry a faint, unsettling melody. The melody of creation and destruction. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 4 of 25. The silence that followed Professor Armitage's revelation was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the rhythmic drip of water from the unseen depths of the cavern. We stood huddled in the flickering lamplight, casting long, dancing shadows against the cyclopean walls. Amelia, normally the most stoic of us, had a hand pressed against her mouth, her eyes wide with a primal fear I'd never seen before. Even Daniel, the perpetual skeptic, looked pale and shaken. So, Daniel finally croaked, his voice barely a whisper, "You're saying these stones, they weren't carved, they were sung into existence?" Armitage nodded grimly. The ancients understood something we've only just begun to grasp, the power of resonance. They discovered frequencies that could manipulate matter at a molecular level, frequencies capable of liquefying stone, shaping it, hardening it. These temples, they're solidified sound waves. He gestured toward the intricate carvings that adorned the walls, swirling patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the lamplight. These aren't decorations, they're echoes. Residual sonic patterns etched into the very fabric of the stone. And that's what's been drawing us deeper. A chilling thought pierced through the fog of disbelief that clouded my mind. "The humming, it's getting stronger," I said, my voice trembling. They all listened intently, and a collective shudder rippled through the group. The low, resonant hum that had plagued us since we entered the temple was indeed intensifying, vibrating not just in the air, but in the very ground beneath our feet, in our bones, in our teeth. It was a sound that seemed to burrow into your consciousness, a physical presence that made your skin crawl and your stomach churn. "We need to get out of here," Amelia whispered, her eyes darting nervously towards the impenetrable darkness that swallowed the tunnel ahead. "Agreed," Armitage said, his voice tight with urgency. "But we can't just retrace our steps. The resonance is amplifying within these walls. We need to find a way to disrupt it, to break the song." He traced his fingers along one of the swirling carvings, his brow furrowed in concentration. "These patterns, I think they're the key. They represent the original frequencies used to create this place. If we can find the right sequence, the right combination." His voice trailed off, lost in thought as he examined the carvings with renewed intensity. The humming grew louder, more insistent, a throbbing pulse that seemed to synchronize with our heartbeats. I felt a growing sense of dread, a certainty that something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, the ground beneath us lurched violently, throwing us off balance. The lamp clattered to the stone floor, plunging us into near total darkness. Panic erupted. Screams mingled with the oppressive hum, which now seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Armitage," I yelled, scrambling in the darkness, my hands outstretched. "Where are you?" "Here," his voice called out, faint and strained. "I've found something, a chamber, this way." Guided by the sound of his voice, we stumbled through the darkness, our hearts pounding in our chests. The ground continued to tremble, the humming intensified, and the air grew thick with a strange, metallic smell. We finally reached a small, circular chamber, barely visible in the faint glow emanating from a crack in the ceiling. In the center of the chamber stood a large, crystalline structure, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. It resembled a giant geode, its surface covered in intricate, geometric patterns that mirrored the carvings on the walls. The humming resonated from the crystal, emanating waves of palpable energy that washed over us. "This is it," Armitage said, his voice awestruck. "The heart of the temple. The source of the resonance." He stepped closer to the crystal, his eyes fixated on its pulsing light. "If I can just understand the sequence, the pattern." He reached out a trembling hand and touched the surface of the crystal. A blinding flash of light erupted from the crystal, engulfing the chamber in a searing white brilliance. A deafening roar filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. I felt a surge of energy coursing through my body, a feeling of being torn apart and put back together again. Then, silence. The light faded, revealing a scene of utter devastation. The crystal was gone, reduced to a pile of shimmering dust. The walls of the chamber were cracked and crumbling. And Professor Armitage, he was gone too. The humming had stopped. The silence that replaced it was more terrifying than any sound I had ever heard. It was the silence of the void, the silence of oblivion. We were alone, trapped in the heart of a dying temple, with no idea how to escape, no idea what horrors awaited us in the darkness. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that we had only made things worse. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 5. The silence in the chamber pressed down like a physical weight. Elias traced the glyphs, his finger leaving a faint trail in the dust. The symbols, now disturbingly familiar, pulsed with a phantom energy he could almost feel. The thrumming in his skull, a constant companion since entering the complex, intensified. He looked at Anya, her face pale in the flickering lamplight. Her hand trembled as she held the resonating fork, its two prongs humming faintly. "Anything?" he whispered, his voice raspy. She shook her head, her eyes wide with a growing fear. "The frequency is changing. It's like the stone is breathing." Elias shivered. Breathing stone. The thought settled in his stomach like a lead weight. He looked up at the cyclopean blocks that formed the chamber's ceiling. Were they truly inert? Or was there something more, something ancient and unknowable, lurking within their crystalline structure? "We need to get out of here," Anya muttered, her voice barely audible above the low hum that now permeated the chamber. As if in answer, a deep groan echoed through the complex, emanating from the depths of the temple. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, the tremor growing stronger with each passing second. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating their hair and clothes in a fine gray film. The resonating fork in Anya's hand buzzed erratically, the frequency shifting wildly. "It's the stones," Elias shouted, his voice laced with panic. "They're reacting to something." He grabbed Anya's hand and pulled her towards the passage they had entered from. The groaning intensified, morphing into a guttural growl that seemed to claw at their sanity. The very air vibrated with an unseen force, pressing against their eardrums. They stumbled through the narrow passage, the ground shaking violently. The walls seemed to pulse with a sickening, organic rhythm. Elias could have sworn he saw the glyphs writhing, their intricate patterns shifting and reforming before his eyes. They reached the antechamber, only to find the exit blocked by a massive stone slab that had slid into place, sealing them within the temple's heart. The groaning now reached a deafening crescendo, the ground heaving beneath them. Anya screamed, clutching her ears. The resonating fork slipped from her grasp and clattered onto the stone floor, its delicate prongs snapping with a sickening ting. Elias felt a surge of despair wash over him. They were trapped. Suddenly, the groaning ceased. An eerie silence descended, broken only by the sound of their ragged breathing. The tremors subsided, leaving a lingering vibration in the air. Elias looked at Anya, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She pointed a trembling finger towards the center of the antechamber. A faint, pulsating light emanated from the floor, growing in intensity with each passing second. The stone beneath their feet began to glow, revealing an intricate network of glowing lines that mirrored the glyphs they had seen earlier. The lines spread outwards, forming a complex, geometric pattern that pulsed with an otherworldly light. The air shimmered, and a figure began to materialize in the center of the glowing pattern. It was humanoid in form, but impossibly tall and slender, its limbs elongated and distorted. Its skin was a translucent white, revealing a network of pulsing veins that glowed with the same eerie light as the floor. The figure raised its head, and Elias recoiled in horror. Its face was a blank, featureless expanse, save for two enormous, black eyes that burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. A voice, cold and resonant, echoed through the chamber, speaking in a language that was both alien and disturbingly familiar. It spoke of creation and destruction, of sound and vibration, of the power to shape reality itself. Elias understood, with chilling clarity, that they had stumbled upon something far older, far more powerful, than they could have ever imagined. The ancient temples were not merely built by sound. They were conduits, resonating chambers designed to channel an unimaginable power. And now, that power had been awakened. Anya whimpered, her eyes fixed on the spectral figure. Elias felt a cold dread grip his heart. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were not going to escape. They had become unwitting participants in a ritual far older than humanity itself, a ritual whose purpose they could only begin to comprehend. The spectral figure extended a long, slender finger towards them, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. The glyphs on the walls flared with a blinding light, and the chanting grew louder, filling the chamber with a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter their sanity. Elias closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. He could feel the power building, the energy swirling around them, pulling them into its vortex. This was it, the end. And then, he heard it. A new sound, faint at first, but growing steadily louder. It was a high-pitched whine, like the sound of 1,000 insects buzzing in unison. It cut through the chanting, disrupting the spectral figure's concentration. Elias opened his eyes and looked towards the source of the sound. He saw it then, a small, flickering light in the distance, moving towards them through the narrow passage. Hope, fragile and uncertain, flickered in his chest. Could it be rescue? Or was it just another nightmare unfolding in this hellish labyrinth? What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 6. The rhythmic chanting continued, a low thrumming vibration that seemed to seep into our very bones. Dr. Aris scanned the hieroglyphs with the modified spectrometer, a faint sheen of sweat glistening on his brow. The readings were erratic, fluctuating wildly with each pulse of sound. He mumbled something about harmonic resonance and structural integrity, but his words were lost in the oppressive drone. "We need to find the source," I said, my voice barely a whisper above the chanting. The air felt thicker now, heavier, as if the sound itself was adding weight to the atmosphere. The feeling of being watched, of being studied intensified. We moved deeper into the temple, the corridor narrowing, the hieroglyphs becoming more intricate, more disturbing. Depictions of beings with elongated limbs and distorted faces, their eyes wide and vacant, stared back at us from the walls. They seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering torchlight, their silent screams echoing the resonant chanting. We reached a larger chamber, circular in shape, with a high domed ceiling. In the center, a massive obsidian obelisk pulsed with an inner light, mirroring the rhythm of the chant. Around its base, a group of robed figures prostrated themselves, their bodies swaying in unison. "The source. They're not chanting," Aris whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "They're receiving." As we watched, one of the robed figures rose, slowly, deliberately. The figure turned to face us, the hood falling back to reveal nothing. There was no face, just a smooth, featureless surface, reflecting the obsidian obelisk like a dark mirror. A chilling wave of dread washed over me, a primordial fear that bypassed logic and reason. "We need to get out of here," I hissed, pulling at Aris's arm. He didn't resist, his face ashen. We backed away slowly, our eyes fixed on the faceless figure. It didn't move, didn't speak, just was. Its presence was a void, a sucking absence of everything human. As we reached the corridor, the chanting intensified, the obelisk pulsing brighter, the hieroglyphs on the walls swirling and shifting like a kaleidoscope. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble. "It's unstable," Aris shouted over the din. "The resonance is overloading the structure." We ran, blindly, desperately, the chanting pursuing us like a vengeful spirit. The corridor twisted and turned, the hieroglyphs blurring into a nightmarish tapestry. The air grew hotter, thicker, making it difficult to breathe. The ground shook violently, cracks appearing in the walls, dust and debris raining down on us. We stumbled into another chamber, smaller than the last, and stopped, gasping for air. This chamber was different. It was bare, devoid of hieroglyphs, the walls smooth and polished. In the center, a single, intricately carved stone bowl rested on a pedestal. The chanting was quieter here, almost a whisper, but the oppressive sense of dread remained, amplified by the unnerving silence. Aris approached the bowl cautiously, his spectrometer held out like a shield. The readings were off the charts, spiking erratically. "This is it," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The focal point." He reached out and touched the bowl, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings. As his skin made contact with the stone, a high-pitched whine filled the air, a sound that seemed to drill into our skulls. Aris screamed, pulling his hand back, his fingers dripping with blood. The stone bowl began to glow, a pulsating, ethereal light that filled the chamber. The whine intensified, morphing into a deafening roar. The ground heaved, the walls buckled. The temple was collapsing. I grabbed Aris and dragged him towards the corridor, but the entrance was blocked by a wall of collapsing stone. We were trapped. The light from the bowl intensified, blindingly bright, engulfing the chamber. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. Then, silence. I opened my eyes cautiously. The light was gone. The dust was settling. The chamber was intact, but different. The walls were no longer smooth. They were covered in hieroglyphs, new hieroglyphs, unlike any we had seen before. And in the center, where the stone bowl had rested, stood the faceless figure, its dark, empty gaze fixed on us. The chanting resumed, softer now, almost a lullaby, but infinitely more terrifying. It wasn't the temple that was collapsing. It was us. Our sanity, our perception of reality, crumbling under the weight of the ancient, alien sound. We were being absorbed, assimilated, becoming part of something vast and incomprehensible. And in that moment, I understood. The temples weren't built by sound frequencies. They were grown, and we were the fertilizer. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 7 of 25. The guttural humming resumed, this time deeper, resonating not just through the air but through the very ground beneath our feet. The hieroglyphs on the walls pulsed with a sickly, internal light, like veins throbbing beneath translucent skin. Even Alara, stoic and pragmatic, seemed unnerved. The flickering lamp in her hand trembled, casting distorted shadows that danced and writhed like trapped spirits. "We need to find another way out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The resonance made it difficult to speak, as if the air itself was resisting the formation of words. We backtracked, the humming growing in intensity with each step. The air grew colder, the chill seeping into our bones. We retraced our steps to the intersection of the three tunnels, the central chamber now pulsating with an eerie green luminescence. "It's getting stronger," Ben muttered, his face pale and drawn. He clutched the sonic analyzer, its screen flickering with chaotic waveforms. "The frequencies are amplifying. It's like the whole structure is waking up." I examined the tunnel we hadn't yet explored. It was narrower than the others, the walls covered in a thick, black substance that shimmered faintly in the green light. It looked organic, almost alive. A tremor ran through the ground, shaking loose dust and pebbles from the ceiling. "This one," I said, pointing down the dark passage. "It's the only option left." Alara hesitated. "Are you sure? It feels wrong." "Everything about this place feels wrong," I replied. "But we're trapped. We have to try." We moved cautiously into the narrow passage. The black substance coating the walls felt strangely smooth and yielding, like touching cold flesh. The humming intensified, morphing into a low, throbbing drone that resonated deep within our skulls. The air grew heavy, thick with a cloying, metallic scent. As we moved deeper, the passage began to slope downwards, leading us into the bowels of the earth. The green light faded, replaced by an oppressive darkness that swallowed the beam of Alara's lamp. The temperature plummeted, the air growing damp and frigid. We walked for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water and the unsettling drone that seemed to emanate from the very walls around us. The passage grew tighter, forcing us to move in single file. I could feel the walls pressing in on me, the smooth, yielding substance clinging to my clothes. Suddenly, the passage opened into a vast cavern. We stepped out, blinking in the sudden shift from claustrophobic darkness to a dim, otherworldly light. The cavern was enormous, stretching far beyond the reach of Alara's lamp. The air was thick with a strange, phosphorescent fog that glowed with a pale, ethereal light. Towering structures rose from the cavern floor, their surfaces covered in the same black, organic substance we'd seen in the passage. They weren't carved or built in any conventional sense, but seemed to have grown organically, like colossal, petrified fungi. The throbbing drone was louder here, resonating through the cavern with a palpable force. In the center of the cavern, bathed in an eerie green light, was a massive, pulsating sphere. It was made of the same black substance as the surrounding structures, but its surface was animated by waves of light that rippled and flowed like liquid. The sphere pulsed rhythmically, expanding and contracting as if it were breathing. Each pulse sent waves of the phosphorescent fog rolling across the cavern floor, creating an unsettling, hypnotic effect. What is that?" Ben whispered, his voice barely audible above the droning. Alara shook her head, her eyes fixed on the pulsating sphere. "I don't know, but I don't like it." As we watched, the sphere began to pulse faster, the green light intensifying. The drone rose in pitch, morphing into a high-pitched whine that pierced our eardrums. The black structure surrounding us seemed to vibrate in response, the organic substance rippling and undulating like living flesh. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a dizzying sense of disorientation. I felt a strange pressure building in my head, as if something were trying to force its way in. I looked at Alara and Ben, their faces contorted in expressions of pain and terror. They, too, seemed to be struggling against an unseen force. The sphere pulsed again, sending a shockwave of energy through the cavern. The ground beneath our feet trembled violently. The black structures began to sway, their surfaces rippling and distorting. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the phosphorescent fog swirling around us in a frenzied vortex. We were trapped, caught in the heart of a waking nightmare. And as the sphere pulsed once more, a chilling realization dawned on me. The ancient temples weren't just built by sound frequencies. They were powered by them. And whatever lay at the heart of this cavern, whatever that pulsating sphere represented, it was about to unleash a power beyond our comprehension. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 8. The resonant hum, now a constant, throbbing presence, permeated everything. It vibrated in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. The landscape, already distorted, began to shimmer, the monolithic stones of the temple appearing to breathe, their surfaces rippling like disturbed water. Even the air seemed thick, viscous, resisting our passage. Professor Armitage, his eyes wide and unblinking, pointed a trembling finger towards the central ziggurat, now looming over us like a predatory beast. "The epicenter," he croaked, his voice strained and unnatural. "The source of the resonance." We pressed on, our steps slow and deliberate, each footfall echoing unnaturally in the charged air. The ground beneath us felt strangely soft, yielding with an unsettling sponginess that sent tremors up our legs. The humming intensified, the pressure in my ears building to a painful crescendo. I felt a strange, nauseating vertigo, as if the world itself were tilting, shifting on some unseen axis. As we neared the ziggurat, the true horror of its construction became apparent. The massive stones, seamlessly fitted together, were not simply placed upon one another, but seemed to flow into each other, their boundaries blurred and indistinct. It was as though the entire structure was a single, colossal organism, pulsating with that low, resonant hum. Carved into the surface of the ziggurat, barely visible in the flickering light, were intricate patterns, unlike any we had seen before. They weren't hieroglyphs or depictions of gods, but complex geometric designs, swirling spirals and interlocking circles that seemed to shift and writhe before our eyes. "Cymatics," whispered Dr. Chen, her voice barely audible above the droning hum. "The visualization of sound. They harnessed the power of sound to shape the very stone." A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I stumbled, catching myself on the rough surface of a nearby stone. The hum intensified, penetrating deeper into my skull, and I felt a terrifying sense of dissociation, as if my consciousness were separating from my body. Suddenly, a piercing shriek ripped through the air, shattering the oppressive silence. It was Maya, her face contorted in terror, pointing towards the summit of the ziggurat. We followed her gaze, our hearts pounding in our chests. Silhouetted against the swirling, otherworldly sky, was a figure. Tall and impossibly thin, it seemed to be woven from the same shimmering, distorted air as the landscape around us. It stood motionless, its form wavering and indistinct, yet its presence radiated an overwhelming sense of dread. Professor Armitage let out a choked gasp. It's one of them," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The architects." The figure began to move, gliding down the side of the ziggurat with an unnerving grace. As it descended, the resonant hum intensified, the air vibrating with an almost unbearable energy. The ground beneath our feet began to tremble violently, cracks appearing in the once solid stone. Panic gripped us. We turned to flee, but the landscape, already distorted beyond recognition, seemed to shift and warp around us, blocking our escape. The ground heaved, throwing us to our knees. The humming reached a deafening crescendo, and the very air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy. The figure was almost upon us. Its features, now visible in the flickering light, were alien and unsettling. Its eyes, large and black, seemed to absorb all light, leaving gaping voids in its face. Its skin was a sickly, translucent gray, stretched taut over sharp, angular bones. It radiated an aura of ancient power, a power that felt both terrifying and alluring. As it reached out towards us, its long, spindly fingers vibrating with the resonant hum, I felt a strange sense of inevitability wash over me. This was it, the end. We had stumbled upon a truth too profound, too terrifying for human minds to comprehend. And now, we were paying the price. The figure's touch was cold, impossibly cold, draining the warmth from my body in an instant. The humming intensified, filling my head, drowning out all other thoughts. I felt a sharp, piercing pain behind my eyes, and then, darkness. The last thing I heard, before the darkness consumed me completely, was the resonant hum, now echoing not just around me, but within me, a part of me. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we had not discovered the secrets of the ancient temples. We had become them. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 9. The humming was deeper now, a physical presence that vibrated the very marrow in our bones. The air shimmered with unseen energy, the ancient glyphs on the temple walls seeming to pulse with an inner light. Amelia, her face pale and drawn, clutched the resonating crystal shard tighter, her knuckles white. The tremor in her hand was mirrored in the flickering flame of the makeshift torch I held. "It's changing," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "The resonance, it's becoming more focused." We had descended deeper into the heart of the temple, following the spiraling corridor downwards. The air grew colder, heavy with an ancient, musty scent that clung to the back of our throats. The smooth, obsidian-like walls, once perfectly uniform, now showed subtle undulations, as if the very stone was breathing. The humming, once a distant drone, had become a chorus, echoing and amplifying within the confined space. We pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand the source of this unsettling phenomenon. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, circular and impossibly high. In the center, a massive crystal structure rose towards the apex of the unseen ceiling, its facets catching the flickering torchlight and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The humming reached a crescendo here, a physical force that pushed against our chests, making it difficult to breathe. "This is it," Amelia breathed, her eyes fixated on the crystalline structure. The focal point. As we approached the central structure, the humming intensified, and the ground beneath our feet began to vibrate. The air shimmered with an eerie, greenish luminescence. The glyphs on the surrounding walls glowed with an internal light, their intricate patterns shifting and swirling as if alive. Suddenly, Amelia gasped, dropping the crystal shard. It clattered on the stone floor, its resonance adding another layer to the already cacophonous soundscape. She pointed a trembling finger towards the central crystal. "Look." A faint, almost imperceptible ripple moved across the surface of the crystal. It started small, like a pebble dropped into a still pond, but rapidly expanded, the ripples becoming waves of light and sound. The humming shifted, morphing into a discordant, almost melodic wail. The ground trembled violently, and cracks began to spiderweb across the floor. Then, the whispers started. Faint at first, barely audible above the humming and the wail, they seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the air itself. They were not in any language we recognized, but they carried an undeniable emotional weight, a chilling blend of sorrow, fear, and rage. Amelia picked up the crystal shard, her hand shaking so violently that it threatened to drop it again. "We have to stop it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. This is what destroyed them." "Stop what?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "What's happening?" These temples weren't built with sound, she said, her eyes wide with terror. They were built by sound, yes, but not to create, but to contain. They were prisons. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a chorus of unintelligible voices. The air grew thick, almost viscous, and the greenish luminescence intensified, bathing the chamber in an unsettling glow. The ground beneath our feet bucked and heaved, and the cracks in the floor widened, revealing glimpses of a bottomless darkness below. These things, Amelia stammered, pointing towards the central crystal, they were trapped here. Imprisoned by the resonant frequencies of the temples. And now we're releasing them. As she spoke, the surface of the central crystal shattered. A blinding flash of light erupted, accompanied by a deafening roar. The ground lurched beneath us, throwing us to our knees. The whispers, now a cacophony of screams, filled the chamber. Through the blinding light, I saw it. A shape, emerging from the heart of the shattered crystal. It was amorphous, shifting and swirling, a vortex of darkness and light. It radiated an aura of pure malevolence, a palpable wave of fear that washed over us, chilling us to the bone. The screams intensified, and the ground split open beneath us, plunging us into the abyss. As we fell, I saw the shape expanding, rising from the shattered remains of the crystal, its form becoming clearer, more defined. It was vast, ancient, and utterly alien. And then, darkness. Part 10. The Resonant Void. The chanting intensified, wrapping around us like a suffocating shroud. The hieroglyphs on the walls pulsed with a nauseating light, each symbol seeming to vibrate in sympathy with the unearthly chorus. Elena, her face ashen, gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my flesh. We pressed ourselves against the cold stone, seeking a refuge that wasn't there. The very air seemed to throb, pressing in on our eardrums, a physical manifestation of the sound. The resonating chamber was now fully activated. The floor beneath our feet began to tremble, not with a violent shaking, but with a low, rhythmic hum that resonated deep within our bones. The flickering light from the hieroglyphs danced across the chamber, casting grotesque, elongated shadows that writhed and twisted like tortured spirits. The chanting grew louder, morphing into a dissonant cacophony that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. "We have to get out of here," Elena yelled, her voice barely audible above the din. But escape was impossible. The entrance we'd used was now sealed, the stone slabs having slid back into place with a sickening thud. We were trapped, imprisoned within this resonating hell. The humming intensified, and the air grew thick, almost viscous. A strange, metallic taste filled my mouth, and I felt a dizziness sweep over me, a disorienting wave of nausea that threatened to pull me under. Elena swayed beside me, her eyes wide with terror. The hieroglyphs on the walls now glowed with an unbearable intensity, their light searing into our retinas. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the light penetrated my eyelids, burning into my brain. When I opened my eyes again, the chamber had transformed. The walls seemed to shimmer and distort, the hieroglyphs melting into a swirling vortex of light and sound. The floor beneath us no longer felt solid, it was as if we were floating in a sea of vibrating energy. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a deafening roar that threatened to shatter our sanity. And then, something shifted. The roaring subsided, replaced by a low, guttural hum that resonated deep within the earth. The swirling light coalesced, forming a shimmering, translucent sphere in the center of the chamber. Within the sphere, I saw a flicker of movement, a shadowy figure that seemed to writhe and contort in agony. Elena gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the sphere. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I didn't know, but a primal fear gripped me, a chilling premonition of something ancient and malevolent. The sphere pulsed with an unholy light, and the figure within grew clearer, taking on a vaguely humanoid form. It was tall and gaunt, with elongated limbs and a head that seemed too large for its body. Its skin was a sickly gray, stretched taut over its skeletal frame. As we watched in horrified fascination, the figure began to solidify, its form becoming more distinct, more real. Its eyes opened, and a wave of pure, unadulterated malice washed over us. They were black, bottomless pits, devoid of any semblance of humanity. The creature let out a silent scream, a ripple of pure psychic energy that slammed into us with the force of a physical blow. I stumbled back, my head throbbing, my vision blurring. Elena collapsed to the floor, clutching her head and moaning in pain. The creature within the sphere continued to scream, its silent shriek echoing in the depths of our minds. It was a sound that resonated with the darkest corners of our being, a sound that spoke of ancient evils and unimaginable horrors. The humming intensified, and the sphere began to crack, fissures spreading across its surface like spiderwebs. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was trapped within that sphere was about to be unleashed. And I knew, with equal certainty, that we were powerless to stop it. The cracks widened, and the sphere shattered, exploding in a shower of light and sound. The creature stood before us, its malevolent gaze fixed upon us. It took a step towards us, and the ground trembled beneath its weight. Its silent scream continued, a relentless assault on our sanity. We were trapped, cornered, with no hope of escape. The creature raised a skeletal hand, its long, bony fingers reaching out towards us. And as its touch grazed my skin, I felt a searing pain, a burning sensation that spread through my body like wildfire. The world around me began to fade, replaced by a swirling vortex of darkness. And in the depths of that darkness, I heard the creature's silent scream echoing, a chilling reminder of the horrors that awaited us. The last thing I saw, before the darkness consumed me entirely, was Alina's face, contorted in a mask of terror. Her eyes, wide with fear, met mine for a fleeting moment. And in that moment, I knew that we were both lost. The resonating hum deepened, vibrating the very marrow in our bones. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to writhe, the figures depicted within them blurring and shifting like mirages. Elias, his face pale and drawn, clutched the resonating fork tighter, his knuckles bone white. It's amplifying, he whispered, his voice strained. The resonant frequency of this place, it's rising. The air grew thick, heavy, making each breath a struggle. A metallic tang filled the chamber, coating the back of my throat. I could feel the pressure building, a palpable force pushing against my eardrums. The ground beneath our feet trembled, a low, rhythmic thrumming that synced with the pulsing hum. We need to leave, now, I said, my voice barely audible above the growing din. But Elias seemed transfixed, his eyes glazed over, staring intently at the central altar. The resonating fork in his hand vibrated violently, almost blurring in his grip. He didn't seem to hear me, lost in some sort of trance. Elias, I shouted, grabbing his arm. He flinched, as if startled awake, a flicker of recognition returning to his eyes. But it was fleeting. His gaze drifted back to the altar, drawn by an invisible force. The humming intensified, morphing into a low, guttural chant that resonated within the very chambers of our skulls. The hieroglyphs on the walls pulsed with an eerie light, casting dancing shadows that distorted the already unsettling depictions. The air shimmered and warped, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. I looked towards the tunnel we had entered through, the only escape route. But it was no longer there. In its place was a solid wall of stone, seamlessly integrated with the rest of the chamber, as if it had always been there. We were trapped. Panic clawed at my throat. We were trapped in a resonating chamber, the frequency steadily increasing, the very stones around us vibrating with an otherworldly energy. I could feel the pressure building inside my head, a throbbing pain that threatened to split my skull open. Elias began to chant, his voice a low, monotonous drone that blended with the guttural hum of the chamber. His eyes were closed, his face contorted in an expression of ecstatic pain. He raised the resonating fork above his head, and the vibrations intensified, sending shockwaves through the air. The hieroglyphs on the walls began to glow brighter, the figures within them animating, detaching themselves from the stone. They weren't simply carvings anymore, they were three-dimensional beings, formed from shimmering light and sound. Their forms were grotesque, twisted parodies of human and animal shapes, with elongated limbs and gaping maws filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, gliding towards us, their movements synchronized with the pulsating rhythm of the chamber. Their eyes, glowing orbs of malevolent energy, fixed on us with a predatory hunger. Terror seized me, paralyzing me in place. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. I could only watch in horrified fascination as the luminous beings closed in, their chanting growing louder, drowning out all other sounds. They reached out with their elongated limbs, their spectral fingers brushing against my skin. The touch was icy cold, sending a jolt of pure terror through my system. I could feel my sanity fraying, the edges of my reality blurring, dissolving into the swirling chaos of sound and light. Elias continued to chant, his voice rising in a crescendo of madness. He seemed oblivious to the creatures surrounding him, lost in his own private communion with the resonant frequency of the chamber. He was no longer the man I knew, he had become a conduit, a vessel for something ancient and malevolent. The creatures pressed closer, their spectral bodies merging with mine, their icy touch searing my flesh. The guttural chanting filled my head, driving out all other thoughts, all other sensations. I could feel myself being pulled into their world, a world of pure sound and vibration, a world where the laws of physics held no sway. The pain in my head intensified, becoming unbearable. I felt a sharp crack, as if something inside my skull had shattered. And then, darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally opened my eyes, the chamber was silent. The humming had stopped, the hieroglyphs were still, and the luminous creatures were gone. Elias lay slumped against the altar, the resonating fork still clutched in his hand, his face pale and lifeless. The tunnel was back, a gaping maw of darkness beckoning me towards escape. But I couldn't move, my body felt heavy, leaden, as if anchored to the spot. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of my heart. I looked down at my hands. They were shimmering, translucent, almost spectral. I could see the stone altar through them. I reached out and touched my face. My fingers passed right through. I was no longer solid. I was becoming one with the resonant frequency of the chamber, transforming into something else. The horror of this realization was a cold, hard knot in my chest. Escape was no longer an option. I was trapped, not just in this chamber, but in this state of being. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that whatever had happened to Elias, was about to happen to me. Part 12. The Whispering Gallery. The resonating chamber pulsed with a low, guttural hum, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something acrid, like burnt hair. Elias traced the intricate carvings on the wall, his fingers catching on the strangely smooth, almost polished surface. They weren't carvings, he realized with a shiver, but grooves, worn smooth by, what? By the very vibrations that had shaped this place? Elena, still pale and shaken, huddled closer to the flickering lamp, her breath catching in ragged gasps. I can hear them, she whispered, her eyes wide and unfocused. The voices, they're louder. Elias listened, straining against the oppressive hum. At first, he heard nothing but the blood rushing in his ears. Then, beneath the drone, he detected a faint susurrus, a whispering chorus too low to decipher, yet too insistent to ignore. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if the stone itself was speaking. He placed his hand on the wall, feeling the subtle vibrations thrumming through the rock. The whispers intensified, swirling around him, insinuating themselves into his thoughts. He pulled his hand back as if burned. "We need to find a way out of here," he said, his voice tight with a growing unease. The whispers seemed to mock him, their sibilant murmurings twisting his words into a parody of fear. They pushed deeper into the resonating chamber, the hum deepening, the whispers growing louder. The air grew colder, the lamplight struggling to penetrate the thickening shadows. The chamber opened into a vast circular space, the walls curving upwards into a dome lost in the gloom. Around the circumference, a series of alcoves, each containing a strange, egg-shaped object made of a dark, metallic substance, pulsed with a faint inner light. "What are those?" Elena breathed, pointing a trembling finger. Elias approached one of the alcoves cautiously. As he drew closer, the whispering intensified, coalescing into distinct, though unintelligible, words. He felt a pull, an almost irresistible urge to touch the egg-shaped object. He resisted, a primal fear clutching at his gut. "I don't know," he said, his voice barely a whisper above the surrounding cacophony. "But I don't think we should touch them." As if in answer, a low, resonant chime echoed through the chamber, emanating from one of the alcoves. The egg within pulsed brighter, its inner light shifting from a dull red to a vibrant, pulsating crimson. The whispering voices rose in a crescendo, their tones shifting from a murmur to a keening wail. Elias grabbed Alina's arm. "We need to leave, now." They turned to flee, but the entrance to the chamber was gone. In its place, a smooth, seamless wall reflected their terrified faces back at them. They were trapped. Panic clawed at Elias's throat. He pounded on the wall, desperate to find a seam, a crack, anything that would give way. But the stone remained impassive, the whispers mocking his futile efforts. The chimes resonated again, another egg pulsing with crimson light. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, pressing in on them from all sides. Elias felt a dizzying wave of nausea, the air growing thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. The temperature plummeted, a chilling wind whipping through the chamber, extinguishing their flickering lamp. They were plunged into absolute darkness, the whispering voices their only companions. Elena screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that was quickly swallowed by the echoing chamber. Elias reached out, his hand closing on empty air. "Elena," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. He stumbled blindly through the darkness, the whispers swirling around him, their words now forming into fragmented sentences, chilling pronouncements that spoke of ancient rituals, of sacrifices, of a power beyond human comprehension. He felt a hand brush against his, cold and clammy. Relief flooded him. "Elena," he whispered. The hand squeezed his, its grip surprisingly strong. He felt a tug, pulling him forward. He followed, his heart pounding in his chest, the whispers growing louder, closer, weaving a tapestry of terror around him. He stumbled, his foot catching on something hard. He fell, his hand ripping free from the cold grip. He landed on something soft, yielding. He recoiled in horror, his fingers brushing against something wet, sticky. He scrambled back, his breath catching in his throat. The whispers seemed to laugh, a mocking chorus that echoed through the darkness. He fumbled for his lighter, his hand shaking so violently he could barely strike the flint. Finally, a tiny flame flickered to life, casting a dim, wavering light. The light illuminated a small portion of the chamber, revealing the source of the wet, sticky substance. It was blood, and in the center of the pool of blood, lay Alina's hand, severed cleanly at the wrist. The whispers intensified, their mocking laughter echoing in his ears. Then, from the darkness beyond the reach of his flickering flame, a voice, cold and inhuman, whispered his name. Part 13. The Resonance Within. The glyph, now seared into my mind's eye, pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence. It wasn't a light I could see with my eyes, but rather one I felt resonating within my skull, a phantom vibration tickling the edges of my perception. Even with my eyes closed, the complex geometric pattern remained, a brand burned into my consciousness. I tried to shake it off, attributing it to stress, to the oppressive silence of the temple, to the insidious dread that had become my constant companion. But the glyph persisted, a silent hum in the symphony of fear. Elena, pale and drawn, sat huddled by the extinguished fire, her gaze fixed on the empty space where the shimmering portal had once been. She hadn't spoken since we'd witnessed its disappearance, the abrupt severing of our only escape route leaving her in a state of catatonic shock. I tried to comfort her, offering words of reassurance I myself didn't believe, but she remained unresponsive, lost in a private world of terror. The silence within the temple was unnerving. It wasn't merely the absence of sound, but a palpable void, as if the very air had been sucked out, leaving a vacuum of anticipation. Even the faint drip of water from the stalactites had ceased, leaving an unnatural stillness that pressed against my eardrums. It felt as if the temple itself was holding its breath, waiting. Driven by a restless anxiety, I began to pace the perimeter of the chamber, my fingers tracing the intricate carvings on the walls. The stone felt strangely warm, almost alive, pulsating with a subtle energy that seemed to mirror the throbbing glyph in my mind. I stopped at a section where the carvings depicted a procession of figures, their bodies elongated and distorted, their faces obscured by elaborate masks. They seemed to be carrying an object, something long and cylindrical, wrapped in cloth. As I traced the outline of the object, the glyph in my mind pulsed brighter, the internal hum growing louder. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the chamber, shattering the oppressive silence. Elena gasped, her eyes widening in terror. I spun around, searching for the source of the sound. A deep fissure had appeared in the floor, splitting the chamber in two. The crack snaked its way across the stone, widening with a sickening groan, revealing a darkness so profound it seemed to absorb all light. The air grew colder, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent, like the smell of blood. The glyph in my mind flared, blinding me with its internal light. I stumbled back, clutching my head, the humming intensifying into a deafening roar. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and the fissure widened further, releasing a wave of icy air that washed over me. I could feel the temple shifting, the very stones groaning in protest as if awakening from a long slumber. From the depths of the fissure, a low, guttural chanting began to rise. It wasn't a human sound, but something ancient and alien, resonating with a power that chilled me to the bone. The chanting grew louder, intertwining with the throbbing in my skull, until it felt as if my very being was vibrating in harmony with the temple's hidden heart. The figures carved on the wall seemed to writhe and twist, their distorted forms becoming more grotesque, their masked faces seeming to leer at me with malevolent glee. The long, cylindrical object they carried pulsed with an eerie green light, mirroring the glow emanating from the fissure. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the temperature plummeted, my breath forming clouds of frost in the frigid air. Driven by an instinct I didn't understand, I reached out towards the fissure, drawn by the chanting, by the pulsing light, by the terrifying resonance that filled my being. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the glyph in my mind was the key, the connection between me and this ancient, awakening power. Elena screamed, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. She scrambled back, her eyes fixed on me, her face contorted in a mask of fear. "Don't," she cried, her voice hoarse with desperation. "Don't go near it." But I couldn't stop. The pull was too strong, the resonance too profound. I took another step towards the fissure, the chanting echoing in my bones, the glyph in my mind burning like a brand. The darkness within the fissure beckoned, promising answers, offering power, whispering secrets that I both longed for and dreaded to hear. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was stepping into the unknown, into a realm of ancient horrors that lay beyond human comprehension. And as I peered into the abyss, I saw, for a fleeting moment, a reflection of myself, not in the darkness, but in the pulsing green light. A reflection that was both familiar and utterly alien, its eyes glowing with an unnatural luminescence, its lips curved into a chilling, predatory smile. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 14. The resonating hum continued, a constant pressure against my eardrums, a vibration that seemed to seep into my bones. We pressed on through the echoing chambers of the temple, the air thick with an unseen dust, the silence broken only by the unsettling thrum and our own hushed breaths. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering lamplight, the figures contorting into grotesque parodies of life as the resonant frequencies intensified. Professor Armitage, his face pale and etched with a grim determination, consulted his notebook, muttering about harmonic oscillations and structural integrity. He pointed to a series of symbols etched above a massive archway, an archway that pulsated with an unnerving rhythm. "This," he whispered, his voice strained, "this is the threshold. Beyond this lies the resonating chamber, the heart of the temple." He paused, swallowing nervously. "But I fear what we might find there." Sarah clutched my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. Her eyes, wide with apprehension, reflected the flickering light, the dancing shadows. I squeezed her hand, trying to convey a reassurance I didn't feel. The hum was growing louder, a physical force pushing against us, making my chest tight. We passed under the archway, and the world seemed to shift. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost palpable energy. The resonant frequency intensified, becoming a deep, visceral throb that resonated in our very core. The chamber beyond was vast, circular, and dominated by a colossal, pulsating crystal. It hung suspended in the center of the chamber, a swirling vortex of light and sound, casting bizarre, dancing shadows across the walls. The hieroglyphs here were different, larger, more intricate. They seemed to be alive, shifting and reforming, as though trying to communicate something beyond our comprehension. A low, guttural chant echoed through the chamber, emanating from the crystal itself, vibrating the very air we breathed. This is incredible, Professor Armitage breathed, his voice awestruck despite the tremor of fear that ran through it. He stepped closer to the crystal, his eyes fixed on the swirling light. This is the source, the heart of the resonating frequency. As he approached, the chanting intensified, the vibrations growing stronger. The hieroglyphs on the walls began to glow with an eerie luminescence, casting the chamber in an otherworldly light. The air shimmered and distorted around the crystal, as if reality itself was beginning to unravel. Suddenly, the ground beneath our feet trembled. A deep crack snaked across the floor, widening with a sickening groan. More cracks appeared, spreading like a spiderweb across the chamber. The walls began to shake, dust and debris raining down from the ceiling. "We have to get out of here," I yelled, my voice barely audible above the cacophony of sound. But Professor Armitage, seemingly entranced by the crystal, didn't move. He reached out towards it, his hand trembling. "No," Sarah screamed, pulling at his arm. But it was too late. As his fingers brushed the surface of the crystal, a blinding flash of light erupted, filling the chamber with an unbearable intensity. We shielded our eyes, the resonant hum transforming into a deafening roar. Then, just as suddenly, silence. Slowly, cautiously, we lowered our hands. The light had subsided, but the chamber was drastically different. The crystal was gone. In its place was a swirling vortex of darkness, a gaping maw that seemed to suck the light and sound from the very air. The hieroglyphs on the walls now pulsed with a malevolent red glow. And Professor Armitage? He was gone too. Panic seized us. We turned and ran, stumbling through the crumbling chamber, the ground shaking beneath our feet. The resonant frequency, now distorted and chaotic, echoed through the temple, chasing us through the collapsing corridors. We ran blindly, desperately searching for an exit, the horrifying realization dawning on us that we might be trapped, entombed within this ancient, sonic nightmare. The chanting returned, louder than before, a guttural, inhuman sound that seemed to claw at our sanity. The walls seemed to close in around us, the shadows stretching and twisting, taking on monstrous shapes. We stumbled through a narrow passage, the air growing thick with a strange, metallic scent. The passage opened into another chamber, smaller than the last, but even more disturbing. In the center of the chamber, bathed in the pulsating red glow of the hieroglyphs, lay a stone altar. And on the altar, something that made our blood run cold. A single, pulsating, human heart. It beat in time with the distorted resonant frequency, a grotesque metronome counting down to an unknown horror. And as we stared in horrified fascination, a voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber. "Welcome," it said, the voice of Professor Armitage, but twisted, distorted, inhuman. "Welcome to the heart of the song. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies?" Part 15. The rhythmic thumping resonated deeper now, no longer just felt through the soles of our boots, but vibrating within our bones. A low hum permeated the air, a discordant harmony that set my teeth on edge. The cyclopean blocks of the temple, once seemingly inert, now seemed to shimmer with an internal luminescence. The hieroglyphs etched into their surfaces pulsed with a faint, sickly green light, as if the very stone were breathing. Alara, pale and trembling, gripped my arm. "It's getting stronger," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the throbbing. "We need to leave, now." I nodded, my own unease escalating into full-blown panic. But the tunnel behind us, our only escape route, seemed to stretch impossibly long, the darkness at its end now pulsing with the same unsettling green light as the hieroglyphs. It felt less like an exit and more like a gaping maw waiting to swallow us whole. The tremors intensified, and small pebbles began to dance across the floor. Cracks snaked their way across the smooth stone, spreading like a web across the temple floor, emanating outwards from the central altar where the obsidian sphere pulsated rhythmically. The green light within the sphere grew brighter, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the walls like phantoms. "It's too late," Marcus croaked, his voice hoarse. He was crouched low to the ground, his hands covering his ears. "We're trapped." A wave of dizziness washed over me. The humming intensified, morphing into a high-pitched whine that pierced my eardrums. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. I felt a pressure building in my skull, a sensation like my brain was about to explode. Then, the sphere began to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, until it was a blur of obsidian and pulsating green light. The humming escalated into a deafening roar, and the very air seemed to vibrate with raw power. The hieroglyphs on the walls blazed with an almost blinding intensity, and the cracks in the floor widened, revealing glimpses of a churning, black abyss below. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a human voice, not anything I'd ever heard before. It was ancient, resonant, and imbued with a power that seemed to shake the very foundations of the temple. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, I knew what it was saying. It was a greeting, a welcome. The ground beneath us lurched violently, and we were thrown to the floor. The obsidian sphere stopped spinning abruptly, plunging the chamber into a near-total darkness, broken only by the faint green glow of the hieroglyphs. The roaring ceased, replaced by a chilling silence that was somehow more terrifying than the noise that preceded it. I pushed myself up, my ears ringing, and looked around. Alara and Marcus were also struggling to their feet, their faces etched with terror. We were no longer alone. Silhouettes began to emerge from the shadows. Tall, slender figures with elongated limbs and heads that seemed too large for their bodies. Their skin was a sickly gray, almost translucent, and their eyes glowed with the same unsettling green light as the hieroglyphs. They moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the floor as if they were floating. As they drew closer, I could see their faces. Their features were sharp and angular, their mouths thin and wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. They were not human, they were something else, something ancient. The creatures surrounded us, their glowing eyes fixed on us with an unnerving intensity. They didn't speak, didn't make a sound. They simply stared, their presence radiating an aura of immense age and power. Alara let out a choked sob. Marcus, his face ashen, whispered a prayer in a language I didn't recognize. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were facing something far beyond our comprehension. Something that had been awakened by the resonant frequencies, something that had been slumbering beneath this temple for millennia. The creatures began to chant. The same resonant language that had echoed through the chamber earlier. The sound was low and guttural, vibrating through the air and resonating within our bones. It was a sound of immense power, a sound that spoke of ancient rituals and forgotten gods. As the chanting grew louder, the floor beneath us began to tremble again. The cracks widened, revealing more of the swirling blackness below. The creatures stepped aside, revealing a gaping chasm that seemed to descend into the very heart of the earth. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the ground beneath us gave way. We plunged into the darkness, the chilling sound of the creatures chanting echoing in our ears as we fell into the unknown. The abyss swallowed us whole. The resonating hum deepened, burrowing into our skulls like a parasitic worm. Elias, his face streaked with grime and sweat, pressed his ear against the cyclopean wall. His eyes, wide and unfocused, darted back and forth as if following something invisible. He muttered something unintelligible, a string of syllables that sounded disturbingly like the resonant drone emanating from the temple. Elias? I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen energy. It crackled with anticipation, with a dreadful promise of something unseen lurking just beyond the veil of our perception. He didn't respond. Instead, he began to trace the carvings on the wall with a trembling finger, his touch strangely hesitant, as if fearing a burn. The carvings themselves seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering torchlight, becoming less like static depictions and more like captured glimpses of something alive, something trapped within the stone. Elias, what is it? What do you see? I pleaded, my voice rising in desperation. He turned to me, his eyes now clear, but filled with a chilling emptiness. They're showing us how he breathed, his voice hoarse. How the ancients built this place. How they shaped the stone, how they moved the mountains. He pointed to a specific carving, a spiral within a spiral, radiating outward like a frozen echo. This is the key. The resonant frequencies, they're not just for shaping stone. They're for shaping everything. A shudder ran through me. The implications of his words were terrifying. If these frequencies could manipulate matter on such a grand scale, what else could they do? What else had the ancients shaped? What else had they created? Just then, a low growl echoed from the depths of the temple. It was a deep, guttural sound, unlike anything we'd heard before. It vibrated through the very floor beneath our feet, making my teeth ache. "What was that?" whispered Sarah, her voice barely audible above the resonant hum and the now constant, unsettling growl. Elias shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know," he whispered back, "but I don't think we want to find out." The growl intensified, closer now, accompanied by a rhythmic scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the stone floor. The flickering torchlight cast grotesque, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming the carvings into monstrous, animated figures. We huddled together, our backs against the cold, pulsating stone, our fear a palpable entity in the suffocating air. We watched in horrified silence as a shape began to emerge from the darkness at the far end of the chamber. It was enormous, a hulking mass of pulsating flesh and stone, barely discernible in the dim light. It moved with a sickening, unnatural fluidity, its form constantly shifting and reforming as if sculpted by unseen hands. The scraping sound grew louder, and we realized with dawning horror that it wasn't being dragged, it was part of the creature. Its limbs, if they could even be called that, were jagged protrusions of rock, scraping against the floor as it moved. The resonant hum reached a fever pitch, resonating not just from the walls, but from the creature itself. The air throbbed with power, with a raw, untamed energy that threatened to tear us apart. Elias pointed a trembling finger at the creature. "The frequencies," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "They didn't just shape the temple, they shaped this." The creature lumbered closer, its form becoming clearer in the flickering light. It was vaguely humanoid, but twisted and grotesque, its features a nightmarish blend of human and animal. Its skin, or what appeared to be skin, was a mottled patchwork of gray and black, stretched taut over bulging muscles and protruding bones. Its eyes, glowing with an unnatural crimson light, fixed on us with a chilling intensity. Terror choked the air from my lungs. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic or reason, that this creature was not of this world. It was something ancient, something that had been dormant for eons, something that had been awakened by our meddling, by our foolish attempt to understand the secrets of the ancients. The growl turned into a low, guttural chuckle, a sound that resonated deep within our bones, shaking us to our core. The creature raised a massive, stone-like hand, its crimson eyes burning into us. And in that moment, I understood. The ancients hadn't built these temples with sound. They had built them to contain it. To contain this. And we had just opened the door. Part 17. The Resonant Void. The silence after the scream was more terrifying than the scream itself. It hung heavy, thick with an unseen pressure, as if the very air was bracing itself for something worse. Elena clutched her bleeding ear, the high-pitched whine still echoing in her skull, a phantom limb of sound. Across from her, Professor Armitage remained frozen, his eyes locked on the now empty space where the spectral figure had stood. What was that?" Elena stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Armitage didn't answer. He slowly knelt, his hand hovering over the intricate carvings on the floor. He traced the lines with a shaking finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It reacted to the frequency," he finally muttered, more to himself than to Elena. "But it shouldn't have. Not like that." Elena struggled to her feet, the dizziness clinging to her like a shroud. The pulsating pain in her ear was a constant reminder of the spectral figure's shriek. She looked around the chamber, the once awe-inspiring architecture now sinister and threatening. The very stones seemed to vibrate with a malevolent energy. "We need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. Now. Armitage seemed not to hear her. He was lost in his own world, his fingers still dancing over the carved symbols. He began to hum, a low, guttural note that resonated strangely within the chamber. Elena watched in growing horror as the carvings began to glow faintly, pulsating in time with his humming. "Professor," she cried, grabbing his arm. "Stop it. You don't know what you're doing." He jerked away, his eyes wild. "Don't you understand, Elena? This is it. This is the key. We can control them." "Control what?" Elena backed away, a cold dread gripping her heart. His eyes were glazed over, his voice hollow and distant. He ignored her, his humming growing louder, the carvings glowing brighter. The air thrummed with an unseen energy, a pressure building in Elena's ears. The ground beneath her feet began to vibrate, and a low, ominous drone filled the chamber. Suddenly, Armitage stopped humming. The carvings dimmed, and the vibrations ceased. A heavy silence descended once more, broken only by Elena's ragged breathing. She stared at the professor, her heart pounding in her chest. He turned to her, a strange, almost beatific smile on his face. "I've found it," he whispered, his voice raspy. "The resonant void." "The what?" Elena couldn't comprehend. His words made no sense. "The space between frequencies," he explained, his eyes gleaming. "The place where these entities exist. I can access it now. I can control it." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the professor she knew. Something had changed, something had broken within him. He reached out a hand, as if inviting her to join him. "Come, Elena," he said softly. "Let me show you the wonders of the resonant void." Elena recoiled, shaking her head. "No, I won't. This is madness." Armitage's smile faded. A flicker of something dark and dangerous crossed his face. "You don't understand," he said, his voice hardening. "This is beyond your comprehension. This is power beyond your wildest dreams." He turned back to the carvings, his fingers tracing the lines once more. He began to hum again, the low, guttural note vibrating through the chamber. This time, the carvings glowed with an almost blinding intensity, and the vibrations were stronger, more violent. The air crackled with energy, and Elena felt a crushing pressure in her chest. The spectral figure reappeared, its form flickering and unstable. It let out another ear-splitting shriek, and Elena clamped her hands over her ears, but it was no use. The sound pierced through her defenses, a searing pain lancing through her skull. Armitage laughed, a hollow, chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. He raised his hands, as if conducting an orchestra of unseen horrors. More spectral figures began to materialize, their forms writhing and shifting in the pulsating light. Elena stumbled back, her mind reeling. She had to escape. She had to get away from this madness. Turning, she ran blindly through the chamber, the spectral figures closing in around her, their shrieks filling the air. The resonant void had opened, and the horrors within were spilling out, threatening to consume her. She ran, not knowing where she was going, driven by a primal fear, her only thought to escape the nightmare that had become her reality. The temple, once a marvel of ancient ingenuity, was now a prison, a resonating chamber of horrors, and she was trapped within its terrifying embrace. The resonant hum permeated us, a physical vibration that seemed to loosen the very molecules of our being. Alara's face, pale in the otherworldly glow, was etched with a mixture of awe and terror. We stood on the precipice of something immense, something older than humanity itself, and the weight of it pressed down on us like a physical entity. "This is it," Thomas whispered, his voice barely audible above the throbbing drone. He gestured towards the central chamber, where the humming emanated from a pulsating sphere of light, suspended in mid-air. It wasn't a physical sphere, more an intersection of sonic waves, woven into a tangible form by an unimaginable force. The light pulsed with the rhythm of the temple, its luminescence casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the cyclopean walls. "What is it?" Alara breathed, her eyes wide with a horrified fascination. "The heart," I said, my voice hollow. "The source of the resonance. The thing that built this place." We moved cautiously towards the pulsating orb, the humming intensifying with every step. The air felt thick, viscous, making it hard to breathe. The glyphs on the walls seemed to writhe and shift as we passed, their strange geometric patterns swimming before our eyes. I felt a growing unease, a primal fear clutching at my insides. This wasn't a place meant for human eyes, for human minds. We were trespassing on something profoundly ancient, something inherently alien. As we neared the central chamber, a low, guttural chant began to emanate from the sphere of light. It wasn't a language we recognized, but it resonated deep within our bones, vibrating through our very essence. It was a sound that spoke of creation and destruction, of cosmic indifference and unimaginable power. Alara stumbled, clutching her head. I can feel it, she gasped. It's inside my head. I felt it too. The chant burrowed into our consciousness, whispering promises and threats in a language older than time. It spoke of a universe shaped by sound, of worlds born from vibrations, and of beings beyond human comprehension. The resonant hum intensified, the sphere of light pulsed faster, and the chanting grew louder, more insistent. Suddenly, the glyphs on the walls flared with an eerie luminescence. The shadows danced with renewed vigor, taking on grotesque, semi-human forms that seemed to writhe and reach out towards us. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the temperature plummeted, sending shivers down our spines. Thomas, his face contorted in a rictus of pain, cried out, It's changing us. He was right. I could feel it too. The resonant hum was weaving its way into our very being, altering us on a fundamental level. My bones ached, my skin tingled, and my thoughts became fragmented, replaced by a growing sense of emptiness. We have to get out of here, I shouted, my voice strained. Now, I turned to flee, but the shadows blocked our path. They coalesced into monstrous figures, their eyes burning with an unearthly light. They were the guardians of this place, the servants of the sound, and they would not let us leave. Alara screamed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that was swallowed by the resonant hum. One of the shadow creatures lunged at her, its ethereal form solidifying into a clawed hand that reached for her throat. Driven by a primal fear, I lashed out, swinging my pickaxe at the creature. The pickaxe passed through its shadowy form, causing ripples of distortion but no real damage. The creature recoiled momentarily, but quickly reformed, its burning eyes fixed on Alara. We were trapped. The resonant hum was growing stronger, the chanting louder, and the shadows more aggressive. We were being consumed by the temple, absorbed into its alien consciousness. Just when I thought all hope was lost, Thomas, his face pale and drawn, stumbled towards the pulsating sphere of light. He raised his hands, as if in supplication, and began to chant along with the sphere, his voice a hollow echo of the ancient sound. The shadow creatures paused, their burning eyes fixed on Thomas. The resonant hum faltered, the pulsing sphere dimmed slightly, and the chanting seemed to listen. What are you doing? Alara cried, her voice laced with terror. Thomas didn't answer. He continued to chant, his voice growing stronger, more resonant. He was somehow communicating with the sound, with the very essence of the temple. The shadows began to recede, their forms flickering and fading. The resonant hum softened, and the chanting subsided into a low, pulsating drone. The sphere of light dimmed further, until it was barely visible. Thomas collapsed to the floor, his body convulsing. The temple fell silent. We rushed to his side, Alara cradling his head in her lap. He was breathing shallowly, his eyes closed. He looked different, older, somehow, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible hum emanating from his body. He had become a conduit for the sound. The resonating hum deepened, a physical presence now, pressing against us like an invisible ocean. The hieroglyphs on the walls pulsed with a sickly, internal light, their intricate carvings seeming to writhe and shift. The air tasted metallic, thick and cloying, and I could feel a strange vibration in my teeth, a discordant harmony that made my jaw ache. Alara gripped my arm, her knuckles bone white, her eyes wide and fixed on the colossal, pulsating heart at the chamber's center. It's quickening, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pervasive drone. The rhythmic pulsing of the heart, once slow and ponderous, was indeed accelerating. With each throb, the chamber vibrated more intensely, the hieroglyphs glowing brighter, the metallic tang in the air growing stronger. The sense of anticipation, of something vast and terrible about to be unleashed, was almost unbearable. A low, guttural growl echoed from the heart, resonating through the chamber, through us. A sound that felt primordial, ancient, and utterly alien. We stumbled back, our retreat hampered by the uneven floor and the growing intensity of the vibrations. The air shimmered, distorting our vision, and the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each pulse of the monstrous heart. The feeling of being observed intensified, no longer just a prickling unease, but a palpable weight, a suffocating awareness of something vast and malevolent focusing its attention on us. "We have to get out of here," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. But even as I spoke, I knew it was too late. A crack, sharp and loud, split the silence. Then another, and another, spider webbing across the floor beneath our feet. The hieroglyphs blazed with blinding light, the air thrummed with an unbearable frequency, and the pulsating heart at the chamber's center began to rotate. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, a vortex of sound and light, drawing everything towards it. The ground beneath us gave way. We screamed, a sound swallowed by the cacophony, as we plunged into the darkness. I landed hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. Disoriented, I struggled to sit up, my head swimming, my ears ringing. The humming was still there, a constant, throbbing pressure against my skull. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. I was in a smaller chamber, circular and dimly lit by the eerie luminescence seeping through the cracks in the ceiling above. Alara lay nearby, groaning, clutching her arm. "Alara," I crawled towards her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you all right?" She opened her eyes, her gaze unfocused. I think so," she mumbled, her voice weak. We were surrounded by bones. Human bones, piled high against the curved walls, skulls staring blankly into the dimness. The air was thick with the smell of decay, a sickening sweetness that clung to the back of my throat. The humming was stronger here, deeper, resonating in my very bones. I felt a crawling sensation on my skin, a feeling of being watched, not just by the empty sockets of the skulls, but by something else, something unseen, lurking in the shadows. The ground trembled beneath us. From the cracks in the ceiling, I could see the rotating heart, a swirling vortex of light and sound, growing larger, closer. The chamber was shaking violently now, dust and debris raining down from above. The bones around us rattled, a macabre percussion accompanying the ominous hum. Alara struggled to her feet, her face pale and drawn. It's pulling everything towards it," she whispered, her voice trembling. We have to find another way out." But there was no other way out. The chamber was sealed, the walls smooth and unbroken. The heart was drawing us in, inexorably, like moths to a flame. The hum was deafening now, a physical force pressing against us, squeezing the air from our lungs. I looked at Alara, her eyes wide with terror, reflecting the swirling vortex of light above. We were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The ancient, malevolent force that had shaped these temples, that had resonated through the centuries, was about to claim us. The ground beneath us disintegrated. We fell, screaming into the blinding light, the deafening roar, the heart of the temple, the heart of the earth, swallowing us whole. The last thing I saw, the last thing I felt, was the vibration, the resonance, the hum, deep within my bones, a final, discordant harmony as we were consumed by the sound. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 20. The humming intensified, a physical pressure against my eardrums. Elias, eyes squeezed shut, swayed like a sapling in a gale. The glyphs on the obsidian disc, bathed in the sickly green light emanating from the resonating chamber, seemed to writhe and pulse. I understood now, with a chilling certainty, that these weren't merely decorative. They were a visual representation of the sound frequencies, a blueprint of the temple's construction, and potentially, its destruction. The air thrummed, a palpable wave washing over us. The ground beneath our feet vibrated, a low growl that resonated deep within my bones. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and small cracks spider-webbed across the walls. Elias cried out, a strangled gasp lost in the rising drone. I grabbed his arm, pulling him closer. "We need to get out of here," I yelled, my voice barely audible above the cacophony. But escape seemed impossible. The entrance, once a gaping maw, was now sealed shut, the stone blocks fused together seamlessly as if they had never been moved. Panic clawed at my throat. The humming was evolving, morphing into something organic. A low, guttural chant began to weave its way through the drone, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves, from the very stone that made up this unholy place. It wasn't a human voice, nor anything I had ever heard before. It was ancient, primordial, and filled with a malevolence that chilled me to the core. The glyphs on the disc glowed brighter, the green light now tinged with a disturbing crimson. The vibrations intensified, shaking the chamber with increasing violence. Cracks in the walls widened, revealing the dark, writhing nothingness that lay beyond. I realized with dawning horror that the temple wasn't just shaking, it was unraveling. The sonic frequencies that had built it were now tearing it apart. Elias, eyes still closed, began to mumble incoherently. His words, distorted and alien, sent shivers down my spine. It sounded like he was repeating the chant emanating from the walls, his voice mimicking the inhuman tones with unnerving accuracy. He was becoming a conduit, a vessel for the ancient, malevolent force that was being unleashed within the temple. I shook him violently. Elias, snap out of it, but he didn't respond. His body trembled, his skin clammy and cold. His eyes flickered open, revealing pupils dilated to black, reflecting the crimson-tinged light like two miniature hells. A section of the wall collapsed, revealing a swirling vortex of darkness. The chanting intensified, resonating with the humming, creating a dissonant symphony of destruction. The obsidian disc spun faster, the glyphs blurring into a single, hypnotic spiral. I felt a pull towards the vortex, an irresistible force drawing me in. The humming seemed to invade my mind, whispering promises of oblivion, of release from the terror that gripped me. I fought against the pull, clinging desperately to a crumbling section of wall. I had to escape. I had to warn the others. But what could I possibly say? What words could convey the sheer, incomprehensible horror of what I was witnessing? The floor beneath my feet gave way. I plunged into the darkness, the chanting echoing in my ears, the humming vibrating through my very being. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if my body was no longer my own. The darkness embraced me, a cold, suffocating embrace. I felt myself falling, tumbling through an endless void, the humming and chanting growing fainter, replaced by a deafening silence. Then, a flash of blinding white light. I landed hard, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented, trying to comprehend what had just happened. I was no longer in the temple. I was outside. I pushed myself up, blinking against the harsh sunlight. I was lying on the grassy plateau, just outside the entrance to the temple. The entrance, however, was gone. In its place was a smooth, unbroken wall of rock, as if the temple had never existed. I looked around frantically, searching for Elias. He was nowhere to be seen. Had he been consumed by the darkness? Or was he still trapped inside, if there even was an inside anymore? The silence was deafening. The humming, the chanting, the vibrations, all gone. The only sound was the wind whistling through the tall grass, a mournful dirge for the secrets buried beneath the earth, for the horror that I had witnessed, and for the knowledge that what I had seen was only the beginning. The sonic frequencies had not just built the temple, they had created something far more ancient, far more powerful, and far more terrifying. And now, it was free. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 21. The resonating hum permeated everything. It vibrated in my teeth, a constant, low thrumming that seemed to burrow deeper into my skull with each passing moment. The glyphs on the inner chamber walls pulsed with an unsettling, internal light, as if breathing in rhythm with the sound. Elena remained catatonic, her eyes glazed over, fixated on the pulsating heart of the temple, the levitating obsidian sphere. I tried again to reach her. Elena, can you hear me? My voice sounded thin and reedy, swallowed by the omnipresent drone. I touched her shoulder, and she flinched, a flicker of awareness in her vacant eyes. But it was fleeting. She returned to her trance-like state, captivated by the obsidian sphere, now radiating a pulsating crimson light. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped my chest. The air grew thick, heavy with an unseen pressure. The humming intensified, evolving into a low, guttural chant. I felt a strange pull towards the sphere myself, a hypnotic allure that battled with my terror. I had to get Elena out of here. I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away, but she resisted, her body rigid, unyielding. "We have to go, Elena. Now," I yelled, my voice barely audible above the rising chant. This wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, an entity woven into the very fabric of the temple. It was ancient, powerful, and it wanted us here. I pulled harder, a desperate surge of adrenaline giving me strength. Elena moaned, a low, guttural sound that mirrored the temple's chant. Her resistance lessened, and I managed to drag her a few steps back. The crimson light emanating from the sphere intensified, casting grotesque, dancing shadows across the walls. The glyphs seemed to writhe and twist, morphing into horrifying, unrecognizable shapes. Suddenly, the chanting ceased. The silence was abrupt and deafening, leaving a ringing in my ears. The crimson light faded, replaced by a sickly green glow. Elena collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing. Her eyes rolled back, revealing only white. Panic clawed at my throat. I knelt beside her, frantically checking for a pulse. It was weak, Freddy. The green glow intensified, bathing the chamber in an unnatural light. The air grew colder, and a putrid smell, like rotting flesh, filled my nostrils. From the corners of the chamber, shadows began to coalesce. They swirled and twisted, taking on vaguely humanoid forms. Their outlines were blurry, indistinct, but I could feel their presence, a malevolent energy that chilled me to the bone. They moved slowly, deliberately, closing in on us. I knew, with chilling certainty, that these were not mere shadows. They were something else. Something conjured by the temple, by the sound, by whatever force resided within that obsidian sphere. Desperation fueled my actions. I hauled Elena's limp body over my shoulder, ignoring the agonizing pain in my back. I stumbled towards the entrance, my eyes darting between the encroaching shadows and the path ahead. The shadows stretched and elongated, reaching out towards us with spectral limbs. I could feel their icy touch on my skin, a burning cold that seared like acid. I cried out, stumbling again, nearly dropping Elena. The chanting began anew, louder this time, resonating deep within my chest. The obsidian sphere pulsed with the green light, its rhythm matching the chant. The shadows moved faster, their forms becoming more defined, more grotesque. I could see their faces now, contorted, skeletal visages with empty, hollow eyes. I reached the archway leading out of the inner chamber. The passage beyond was shrouded in darkness, but it offered a sliver of hope, a chance to escape this nightmare. I staggered through the archway, the shadows snapping at my heels. As I stumbled into the passage, a wall of force slammed into me, throwing me back against the stone floor. Elena tumbled from my grasp, landing with a sickening thud. The shadows closed in, their skeletal hands reaching, grasping. The chanting reached a crescendo. The green light pulsed, blindingly bright. I looked back at the obsidian sphere, now radiating an almost unbearable energy. And then, I saw it. Within the heart of the sphere, a single, malevolent eye opened, staring directly at me. The eye pulsed with the green light, and a voice, ancient and chilling, echoed through the temple. It spoke not in words, but in a language of pure terror, a language that resonated deep within my soul. And in that moment, I understood. The temple wasn't built by sound, it was fueled by it. And we were the fuel. The shadows descended, engulfing us in a wave of icy darkness. The chanting intensified, drowning out my screams. The last thing I saw, before the darkness consumed me completely, was the obsidian sphere, pulsating with malevolent energy, the single eye staring, watching, as we were claimed by the temple and its horrifying secrets. Part 22. The Resonance of Ruin. The chanting had stopped. The oppressive weight that had pressed down on us, the very air thick with unseen force, lifted. But the silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was a hollow silence, a void where something immense had once resided, leaving behind an echoing emptiness that vibrated within our bones. I looked at Alara, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. The stone beneath our feet, once humming with an unnatural energy, was now cold and inert. The hieroglyphs, moments before swirling with spectral light, were dull and lifeless etchings in the rock. The transformation was so complete, so sudden, it felt like waking from a fever dream, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease and disorientation. What happened? Alara whispered, her voice hoarse. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. I didn't know. Had the entity been appeased? Had it simply moved on? Or had it retreated, gathering its strength for something worse? We stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in the unnatural stillness. Then, a low rumble echoed from the depths of the temple. It wasn't the rhythmic chanting we'd heard before, but something deeper, more visceral. It felt like the earth itself was groaning, a sound of immense strain, as if something colossal were shifting beneath us. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through me. I grabbed Alara's hand. We have to go, now. We stumbled through the echoing chambers, the only sound the crunch of our boots on the ancient stone and the low, unsettling rumble that continued to grow in intensity. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to blur as we passed, the faint residue of their spectral glow lingering like afterimages burned onto our retinas. As we neared the entrance, the rumbling intensified, accompanied by a sickening grinding sound. Cracks appeared in the walls, spider webbing across the stone like fractured glass. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating us in a fine gray film. We burst out into the blinding sunlight, blinking against the sudden brightness. The jungle around us seemed to vibrate in sympathy with the subterranean tremors. The trees swayed, their leaves rustling uneasily. The air itself felt charged, heavy with an unseen energy. Then, we saw it. The temple, the massive structure that had stood for millennia, was sinking. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, then with increasing speed, the colossal stone blocks sliding against each other with a horrifying grinding noise. The ground beneath the temple buckled and cracked, the earth opening up to swallow the ancient structure whole. We watched in horrified fascination as the temple disappeared into the earth, the ground collapsing in on itself, leaving behind a vast, gaping chasm. The rumbling ceased. The dust settled. The jungle fell silent. The only evidence that the temple had ever existed was the gaping hole in the earth, a raw wound in the landscape, and the lingering sense of dread that clung to us like a shroud. Alara sank to her knees, her face buried in her hands. I knelt beside her, putting my arm around her shaking shoulders. We were alive, but we had witnessed something profoundly disturbing, something that challenged our understanding of the world. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant cries of unseen birds. Then, Alara raised her head, her eyes wide with a newfound horror. The sound, she whispered, her voice trembling. It's not gone. I listened, straining my ears. At first, I heard nothing but the rustling of the leaves and the chirping of insects. Then, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, resonating deep within the earth. It was the same frequency as the chanting, the same frequency that had animated the hieroglyphs, the same frequency that had filled the temple with an unseen presence. But it was different now, distorted, fractured. It was the sound of something broken, something unleashed. The hum grew stronger, resonating through the ground, up through our bodies, vibrating within our very bones. It was a sound that spoke of ancient power, of something vast and unknowable stirring in the depths of the earth. It was the sound of a world tilting on its axis, the sound of the old gods awakening. And as the resonance intensified, a chilling realization dawned on me. The temple hadn't contained the entity. It had been a conduit, a focal point. And now that it was gone, the entity was free. The sound resonated, a promise of something terrible to come. And we, the sole witnesses to its awakening, were left alone in the heart of the jungle, with nothing but the echoing silence and the rising dread. The horror was not over. It had only just begun. What if ancient temples were built by sound frequencies? Part 23. The resonating hum deepened, a physical pressure against my chest, forcing the air from my lungs. Alara swayed, her face a mask of serene terror, her eyes fixed on the pulsating orb. The glyphs on the walls seemed to writhe and shift, as if the very stone was melting. The feeling of being watched intensified, no longer a prickling at the back of my neck, but a suffocating presence, a cold breath on my skin. The silence, broken only by the low thrum of the sphere, became a tangible entity, pressing in on us, isolating us, preparing us. It's calling something, Alara whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum. Something vast. The orb pulsed faster, the light intensifying, bathing the chamber in a sickly, pulsating green. The air shimmered and distorted, and from the center of the light, a shape began to coalesce. It wasn't solid, more like a mirage flickering in the desert heat. It stretched and contorted, a swirling vortex of darkness within the light, its edges undefined, constantly shifting. Terror, raw and primal, clawed at my throat. My instincts screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but stand there and watch this thing take form. But I was rooted to the spot, my muscles locked, my gaze magnetized to the growing darkness. Alara, too, seemed paralyzed, her hand gripping mine so tightly I felt the bones grind. The shape began to solidify, resolving into a towering figure, humanoid in form, but impossibly large. Its limbs were long and thin, ending in claws that seemed to drip shadows. Its head was elongated, almost serpentine, with eyes that burned like embers, gazing down at us with an ancient, inhuman intelligence. There was no malice in those eyes, no anger, no hatred. Only a cold, dispassionate curiosity, the gaze of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. The hum intensified, vibrating the very floor beneath our feet. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the glyphs on the walls blazed with an eerie, otherworldly light. The figure moved, its movements fluid and unsettling, like a puppet controlled by invisible strings. It raised a hand, a long, skeletal finger pointing directly at us. We were wrong, Alara choked out, her voice filled with a chilling resignation. This isn't a weapon, it's a beacon. The figure continued its slow descent, the shadows around it deepening, swallowing the light. The pressure in the chamber grew, pushing down on us, crushing us. I could feel my bones creaking under the strain, my lungs struggling to draw breath. And then, it spoke. Not with words, not with any sound that could be processed by human ears. It communicated through a direct transmission of thought, a wave of pure, raw information that flooded my mind. Images flashed through my consciousness. Vast, alien landscapes, swirling nebulae, impossible geometries, and beings beyond comprehension. I saw the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, the endless cycle of creation and destruction. It was too much, too vast, too alien. My mind reeled, struggling to process the sheer volume of information. The message, if it could be called that, was simple, yet profound. We were not alone. We had never been alone. And we were being observed. The figure lowered its head, its burning eyes inches from mine. I could feel its breath, cold and stale, like the air in a tomb. And then, another wave of thought, this one clearer, more focused. You are interesting, asterisk. The voice, if it could be called a voice, was ancient, echoing with the weight of eons. It was devoid of emotion, yet filled with a chilling curiosity. We have been watching, waiting, asterisk. The figure reached out, its long, skeletal fingers brushing against my cheek. The touch was like ice, draining the warmth from my body. You have potential, asterisk. Another wave of images flooded my mind, visions of twisted landscapes, of strange, pulsating cities, of beings that defied description. Join us, asterisk. The offer, if it could be called an offer, hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Join them? Become one of them? The very thought sent a shiver down my spine. What would that entail? What would become of me? Alara, her face pale and drawn, shook her head, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. Don't, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Don't listen to it. The figure paused, its burning gaze shifting to Alara. She does not understand, asterisk. The pressure intensified, the hum growing louder, the light from the orb blinding. I felt myself slipping, my consciousness fading, the allure of the unknown pulling me in. Join us, and become more, asterisk. The darkness closed in. The resonating hum deepened, a physical pressure against my eardrums, a vibration that seeped into my bones. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to writhe, the carved figures twisting in an agonizing, silent dance. The air shimmered with a heat I couldn't explain, a stifling, suffocating warmth radiating from the very stone itself. Elena, her eyes wide and unfocused, swayed on her feet. Her chanting had ceased, replaced by a low, guttural moan, a sound both animalistic and eerily melodic. I lunged for her, grabbing her arm, trying to pull her away from the epicenter of the sonic assault. But she was rooted to the spot, a statue carved from flesh and bone, her gaze fixed on the pulsating, glowing orb at the heart of the chamber. The orb, no longer the size of a fist, now pulsed like a monstrous heart, filling the chamber with an unbearable light. Elena, I yelled, my voice lost in the deafening drone. I shook her violently, but she remained unresponsive. Panic clawed at my throat. The walls around us vibrated with increasing intensity, cracks spider webbing across the ancient stone. The very air seemed to thicken, viscous and heavy, making it hard to breathe. The floor beneath us trembled. Then, the whispers began. Not the hushed, sibilant whispers we'd heard before. These were different, deeper, louder. They seemed to emanate not from the walls or the orb, but from within my own skull, a cacophony of voices vying for attention, weaving a tapestry of fear and madness. Embrace the sound, asterisk. Become the sound, asterisk. The sound is all, asterisk. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was no use. The whispers permeated everything, drowning out all other thought, twisting my sanity, pulling me into their swirling vortex of madness. Elena's moan intensified, morphing into a shriek that cut through the oppressive drone. Her body contorted, her limbs twisting at unnatural angles. The light from the orb intensified, blindingly bright, bathing the chamber in an unearthly glow. The hieroglyphs on the walls seemed to detach themselves from the stone, swirling around us like a swarm of luminescent insects. The ground beneath our feet buckled. I stumbled, falling to my knees. The whispers intensified, a chorus of voices chanting, promising power, promising oblivion. I saw Elena's skin begin to shimmer, her form flickering, as if she were becoming translucent. Then, with a sickening lurch, the floor beneath us gave way. We plunged into darkness, the resonating hum fading into a distant thrum. I landed hard, the air knocked from my lungs. The impact jarred me, the whispers momentarily silenced. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body screaming in protest. Blindly, I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold and smooth. Elena, Elena, I croaked, scrambling to my feet. She didn't answer. My eyes, slowly adjusting to the darkness, began to discern shapes. We were in a vast cavern, larger than any we'd seen before. The air was thick with the smell of dust and decay. Above us, a single shaft of light pierced the darkness, revealing the gaping hole through which we had fallen. The orb. It was still there, suspended in midair, pulsating with an eerie light. But it was smaller now, its intensity diminished. And Elena, she was standing before it, bathed in its light, her back to me. She was no longer the woman I knew. Her body seemed elongated, distorted, her skin shimmering with an unnatural luminescence. Her arms were outstretched towards the orb, as if embracing it. The whispers began anew, but this time they were fainter, more distant. I took a tentative step towards her, fear warring with a strange sense of compulsion, a desire to join her, to embrace the sound, to become the sound. Elena, I whispered, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, her face bathed in the orb's light. Her eyes, no longer human, glowed with an alien luminescence. Her lips curved into a chilling smile, a grotesque parody of her once warm and vibrant expression. The sound has chosen me, she said, her voice resonating with an unearthly power. Join me, Daniel. Embrace the sound. Become one with the sound. The whispers intensified, urging me forward, promising me power beyond comprehension. I struggled against their pull, against the seductive call of the orb, against the horrifying transformation of the woman I loved. One more step. That's all it would take. One more step into the light. One more step into oblivion. Part 25 would determine my fate, and perhaps, the fate of the world. The resonating hum intensified, morphing into a physical force that buffeted us. The hieroglyphs, now glowing in infernal crimson, seemed to writhe and shift, their shapes blurring like heat haze. Alara screamed, clutching her ears, but the sound was beyond blocking, vibrating not just through the air but through our very bones. I felt a sickening twist in my gut, a sensation of being unraveled, molecule by molecule. The air grew thick, viscous, making each breath a struggle. A metallic tang filled my mouth, the taste of blood, though I hadn't bitten my tongue. The walls around us pulsed, the stones seeming to breathe. Cracks spider-webbed across the surface, revealing not darkness, but a pulsating, violet light that emanated an unearthly cold. From these fissures, tendrils of black smoke began to seep, coiling and twisting like living things. The smoke had a strange, oily sheen and moved with unnatural speed, snaking towards us with what felt like malevolent intent. "It's the resonance," Elias gasped, his voice strained, his face pale and drawn. "It's tearing the fabric of reality." The stone floor beneath our feet began to undulate, the rhythmic pulses growing stronger, faster. The feeling of being disassembled intensified. I could feel the individual cells in my body vibrating, straining against some invisible force. The world around us began to lose cohesion. The walls shimmered, the floor buckled, the very air seemed to fray at the edges. The black smoke reached us, wrapping around our ankles, icy cold and surprisingly strong. It pulled, dragging us towards the fissures in the wall, towards the pulsing violet light. Alara sobbed, her eyes wide with terror. "We're going to die here." I wanted to reassure her, to tell her everything would be all right, but the words wouldn't come. The resonance was too powerful, drowning out all other thoughts. My mind was a chaotic swirl of fear, confusion, and a growing sense of inevitability. Then, in the midst of the chaos, I remembered the diapason. The small, silver tuning fork I'd found in Elias's bag. The device that could supposedly harmonize or disrupt the resonant frequencies. I fumbled for it in my pocket, my fingers numb and clumsy. I pulled it out, the metal cold against my skin. It seemed impossibly small, pathetically inadequate against the overwhelming power of the temple. But I had to try. Holding the diapason aloft, I struck it against the stone floor. A clear, pure tone rang out, a tiny pinprick of sound against the overwhelming roar of the resonance. For a moment, nothing happened. The violet light pulsed, the black smoke coiled, the walls continued to crumble. Despair threatened to overwhelm me. Then, I felt a shift. A subtle change in the air, a lessening of the pressure. The crimson glow of the hieroglyphs flickered. The pulsing violet light seemed to dim slightly. The resonant hum faltered, a momentary break in the oppressive drone. Hope surged through me, fragile but real. I struck the diapason again, and again, the pure tone cutting through the chaotic noise. Slowly, gradually, the resonance began to weaken. The crimson glow faded, the violet light retreated, the black smoke dissipated. The walls stopped crumbling, the floor stilled. The pressure on my body eased, the feeling of disintegration receding. The silence that followed was deafening. We stood there, gasping for breath, the aftershocks of the resonance still vibrating through us. The temple, though damaged, was still standing. The hieroglyphs, no longer glowing, seemed to stare down at us, silent witnesses to our near destruction. Alara collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief. Elias leaned heavily against the wall, his face ashen. I looked at the diapason in my hand, the small, silver fork that had saved us from oblivion. It seemed heavier now, imbued with a power I couldn't comprehend. We had survived. We had escaped the temple's deadly embrace. But the experience had changed us, marked us in ways we couldn't yet understand. The knowledge of the power hidden within these ancient stones, the terrifying reality of the resonant frequencies, would forever haunt our dreams. As we stumbled out of the temple, into the pale light of dawn, we didn't speak. There were no words to adequately express the horror we had witnessed, the terror we had endured. The silence stretched between us, a heavy blanket woven with fear and awe. We walked away from the temple, leaving behind the ruins of a civilization built on sound, a civilization whose secrets were both wondrous and terrifying. And as we journeyed back towards the world we knew, we carried with us the chilling certainty that the silence of the ancient stones held more secrets than we could ever hope to uncover. The resonance, though quieted, still echoed faintly in our bones, a constant reminder of the thin veil separating our reality from something far more ancient, far more powerful, and far more terrifying.